Hey guys, Grifton here, and today I want to talk about the best spec combo for you in Wrath. Now the reason I want to talk about this early is actually because you need to decide kind of early on which professions you want to go down if you're going to be one of those people that likes to use their professions to build out their character a little bit better, and you can't really determine that unless you know both of your specs, because sometimes one will have a big benefit from a profession and others won't have any, so it doesn't matter, and you kind of need to make that decision of specs now so you can make the decision of professions now. But we're going to just talk about the specs first, and hopefully soon we'll have a video about specs. Now, if you're doing anything PvP, I'm just going to put this out there. One of your specs is usually going to be PvE and the other one PvP, so this won't affect you. But if you are a pure PvEer and trying to figure out what to do with your other spec, that's what this video is for. So let's go ahead and get into it. First up is actually Rusto. So the way I've got this set up is I've got the Rusto with Bear, and then there's pros and cons, and then I put some stars next to the ones that I recommend. Now these are just the ones I recommend. You can do whatever you want. You don't have. There is no true min-max here, really. There's kind of one, but we'll go over that. But whatever you feel comfortable playing, and don't feel pressured to play a certain two specs. If you're playing your Rusto as a main, choose whatever you want as your other. This is like a fun spec. Do what you want. Okay, so obviously if you take a feral bear, you can play all three roles. You can do bear, cat, and healer. So that means you're going to be able to queue in instances much faster because you can queue up for all three roles. And tanks are usually the most in demand, but sometimes healers come in demand too. But by having both, you've got them both covered. They are both very different roles, so sometimes that's really appealing. For me personally, I love playing two different types of Druid. I think it's really interesting when you're playing, a bear 1 second and then a healer the next second. However, you can't really switch mid-raid. And now, what I mean isn't that your raid is just going to lose a tank and they're like, hey, can you fill in? Yeah, you could do that, no big deal. What I mean is, for a fight that doesn't require as many tanks, if they're like, hey, we don't need a tank, does anybody want to go to a different spec? They're not going to ask you to go Rusto. They would rather have a tank go DPS to increase their DPS. So having a tank Rusto, you're kind of a little limited when it comes to raid flexibility. But they also are going to have two separate gear sets. You're going to be lugging around a lot of gear if you do this. With the bag sizes, it's not a crisis, but it's something to factor in. The next one is the cat. Pretty much the same idea. So you can play all three roles, so you can queue fast. But you can switch between roles mid-raid because a lot of times, sometimes you'll have a fight that doesn't have a lot of healing intensity, but you want to burn through it fast. So you can switch to a cat DPS and burn it down much quicker, losing your healing obviously, but gaining your DPS. And cats are very good DPS, especially single target for boss fights and things like that. They do require two separate gear sets, so you have to factor that in. But other than that, really good choice, hence the star. Then you've got the Rusto Boomkin. Actually, I also gave a star for this, pretty much for the same reasons. The one big benefit to this is they share pieces of gear. Now, if you don't know, they went away from the damage and healing and damage for each class. Instead, there's just spell power. So gear is going to start seeing a little bit more shared. Now, just because it has spell power doesn't mean it's a healing piece, and just because it has spell power doesn't mean it's a DPS piece. You kind of gotta figure out where it goes. But for a lot of cases, you can share pieces of gear. Even if you don't have a great Boomkin set, you can use your heal set to do some good stuff. But they're both caster classes, so if you feel comfortable being outside of the melee, you don't like getting in close with the boss, then Boomkin's probably a better DPS choice for you, because you can just pretty much stay out on the outskirts where you're comfortable. And you can switch between roles mid-raid for the same reason you can with Cat. If they don't need your heals and you can go to DPS, you can switch. Now, you are losing that 3Q ability, you can queue for all three. You don't have a tank anymore, so the queues are going to be a little bit slower for regulars and heroics for the Dungeon Finder, so keep that in mind. The other thing, the last thing is healer or Rusto. So the only time I actually see this played is when people have a dungeon set or dungeon spec and a raid set. Now this works fine. I don't recommend it personally, but I know a lot of people do it. The downside obviously is you have no dedicated DPS spec for soloing content, and there will be content to be soloed even once you hit 80. So keep that in mind. But you do have one set of gear, so that makes sense. And it's not as flexible for raids, so if they need somebody to fill in for a role or anything like that, you are pretty much just a Rusto Druid, and there's not much you can do about it. But yeah, that's definitely something I have seen people do, and it does make sense. Once you get enough gear, you can heal like heroics in any spec. I mean, the gear is really going to be like the determining factor. But let's move on to bear. So bear. Okay, so I just went over Rusto. That's really the only scenario where I would say go the same spec twice, and even then I don't recommend it. With bear, cat, and boomkin, I don't recommend those at all. The only time I would ever do that is if I was trying out a new spec and I didn't want to sacrifice my current spec. I could just swap into it for raid, but then try my other spec for 5-mans and things like that to test it out. But that's more of like a narrow scenario, whereas I'm talking more long term. I would not go bear. I put them in here just to kind of, as a placeholder, because I don't want to have to make the chart different every time. But yeah, so don't go bear. Okay, so bear feral though, or bear cat, I should say. So you can get unique glyphs for talents. If you don't know, you can't really go bear cat as one spec anymore because of glyphs, and there are some talents that you wouldn't take as a bear that you would take as a cat, and vice versa. So you do want to kind of, if you are going to go bear cat, you do need to build 2 separate specs. They can switch between roles mid-raid, which is pretty cool. Like if you are a tank and they all of a sudden need you to go cat, no problem. Like let's say that it's a fight that only requires 1 tank, bam, you're done. And if you are a cat and they need an extra tank, let's say they're 2 tanking everything, but for this one fight they need a 3rd tank, you can easily switch to a tank and do your job. So that's really helpful for the raid. And they share a lot of the same gear, so that's obviously a big plus. So you don't have to lug around a ton of extra gear for your other spec. I put that as a star because I definitely see a lot of people doing this. I mentioned that bear tanks aren't going to be as in demand as they are in TPC. So it's likely that would probably be the best case scenario where you're a cat that every once in a while they might ask you to be a bear. Okay, the next one up is Boomkin. So bear Boomkin. You can switch between roles mid-raid, and they are completely different playstyles, which again, I put as a plus because I like mixing it up. I like trying new specs. However, you got your 2 different gear sets, you're going to be lugging around some extra gear. The other one I starred here is bear and Rusto. So you can play the 3 roles, fastest queue time. They're all also completely different roles. Again, I like that. You need 2 separate gear sets, and you can't switch mid-raid. So pretty much the same thing I said before on the Rusto. I'm saying again here because I do think that's a good combo. Alright, next up is Kitty. So Kitty Bear I just talked about. I think it's a great combo. I don't have starred here, but you could obviously do cat, but you're going to understand why I started the other 2 when I get to it. So yeah, that's honestly a good combination. The cat bear, I already just went over it. The next one is cat, don't do it. The next one is Boomkin. So cat Boomkin, you can switch between roles mid-raid if you need to. Completely different playstyles, but they're both DPS. So the cool thing about this is you can choose the optimal DPS per fight. So let's say you are fighting a boss that you can't get behind. If you can't get behind it, you can't do as good of DPS on it because you're relying on your shreds. So your DPS numbers are down. Well, as long as your raid's okay with it, you can switch to Boomkin for that one fight and pump hard, and then you can still do great DPS if that's your big goal, is just high DPS numbers. Yeah, that would be really good for you. So you've got both specs for DPS. Now the downside to this is you have slow queue times because you're only one thing. You're a DPS. And you have to carry on 2 separate gear sets. But honestly, this is a really good combo if you're someone who really likes to just pump out numbers. If you are a druid looking to top charts, this is probably the combo you're going to go with. Okay, and the other one I started is Cat and Rusto. And the reason I really like this, I've kind of mentioned it before already, but I'll go over it, is because you can play all 3 roles really well. But you do have to carry on 2 separate gear sets. So, yeah. Alright, let's just go ahead and move on to Boomkin. Now, I know we've actually already done every pairing, but I didn't want to leave Boomkin off. I feel like they've been given the shaft for years now, so I didn't want to just cut Boomkins out. They are a decent spec in Wrath, and people are going to be maining them, and they're fun to play, especially in Wrath when it becomes a little bit more complex. So the Boomkin Bear. Obviously, you can switch between roles mid-raid. They're completely different playstyles and 2 separate gear sets. Boomkin Cat. Obviously, you're going to be optimal DPS for the same reasons that Cat Boomkin was. Boomkin, don't do it, waste of time. And Boomkin Rusto is great because you share loot. You can get faster Qs than just a Boomkin. They're both casting classes, and you can switch roles mid raid. Now that's it. That's all the pairings you can do. Like I said, the PvP is not included here. Now I hope this at least gave you an idea of what kind of pair you want to go with. Gave you some great ideas on maybe where you're headed, because the next video I plan to put out for Wrath is going to be related to professions, and knowing this will make it much easier for you to determine your professions so you can start gathering stuff if you need to. Anyway guys, if you have any questions, throw them in the comments. Thanks for watching, and as always guys, take care.